He leaned across the desk, close enough that she could smell the cedar and cold ambition on his skin, and asked her the one question that changed everything between them. Do you like it from behind? The view, the city looks different when you're not standing at the front of the room. Nancy Okafor blinked. Her heart was hammering so loud she was certain the entire 42nd floor could hear it. She had misread him, completely, and the slow, dangerous smile that spread across Ryu Songwon's face told her he knew exactly what she had thought he meant. That was the moment she understood. This man was not going to be easy. He was not going to be kind. He was not going to be safe. And somehow, God help her, she was already 3 steps past the point where walking away would hurt less than staying. This is the story of 2 people who had no business falling into each other's orbit. A boardroom that became a battlefield. A secret that could destroy everything, and a love so reckless it nearly burned them both to the ground. Stay with me. You do not want to miss a single second of this. And if you are new to this channel, welcome to AfroKorean Stories. Hit that subscribe button right now because we tell the kind of love stories that will keep you up at night, and you do not want to miss what comes next. Nancy Okafor had built herself from scratch. That was not a metaphor. She had arrived in Seoul 6 years ago with 2 suitcases, a postgraduate degree in international corporate law from the University of Lagos, a scholarship that barely covered her rent, and the kind of stubborn quiet that people often mistook for meekness. She was not meek. She had simply learned early that the loudest voice in the room rarely belonged to the most dangerous person in it. By 28, she was a senior legal associate at Kong & Seo, one of Seoul's most respected corporate law firms. She had argued cases that older men with graying temples and impressive golf handicaps had told her she was too young, too foreign, and too female to touch. She had won most of them. She had learned Korean in 11 months, not because anyone expected her to, but because Nancy Okafor did not like being in any room without understanding every word being said about her. She was tall, dark-skinned, sharp-featured. With natural hair she kept twisted back during the week and free on Sundays when she sat by the Han River and reminded herself that she was still a person and not just a career. Her laugh, when it came, was unexpected, full and warm and slightly too loud for the conservative halls of Kong and Seo. She had been asked once to moderate it. She had smiled at the partner who made the request, and then laughed even louder the next time something struck her as funny. She was good at her job. She was better than good. And she had just been assigned the most complicated client the firm had taken on in a decade. Ryu Songwon. His name alone made the senior partners nervous. At 34, he was the CEO of Ryu Capital Group, a conglomerate that touched everything from real estate to technology infrastructure to private equity. He had inherited the company at 26 when his father collapsed from a stroke in the middle of a board meeting, and instead of letting the vultures his father had called board members strip the company apart, he had done something that became legendary in Seoul's business circles. He had shown up the next morning, his father still in the ICU, sat down at the head of the table, and quietly removed every single executive who had already begun making calls about succession. Not fired them, removed them. The distinction, people said, was important with Ryu Songwon. Firing implied emotion. What he did was surgical, cold, absolute. 8 years later, Ryu Capital Group had tripled its value. He had offices in Seoul, Tokyo, Dubai, and now, most controversially, Lagos. The Lagos expansion was the reason Kong and Seo was involved. The reason Nancy was involved. Someone had decided that the best person to navigate the complex intersection of Korean corporate law and Nigerian regulatory frameworks was the Nigerian-born lawyer who understood both. She had read his file 3 times before the first meeting. She wished she had read it 4 times. He was already in the conference room when she arrived, and that was the first thing that surprised her. Powerful men were almost always late. It was a form of language, a way of speaking dominance before a single word was exchanged. Ryu Songwon was not late. He was seated, jacket still on, a single pen in his hand, reviewing documents she recognized as the preliminary frameworks her team had prepared. He looked up when she walked in. Nancy had been looked at in many ways in her years in Seoul. Curiosity, admiration, thinly veiled condescension. Ryu Songwon's look was none of those things. He looked at her the way she imagined a person looked at a contract clause they had not expected to find, with sharp, sudden attention. "You are Okafor?" His Korean was clean and unornamented, the kind that came from education rather than warmth. "I am," she said, setting her portfolio on the table and sitting down across from him without waiting for an invitation. "And you have already found the error on page 7 of our preliminary framework." A pause. "How did you know?" "Because your pen stopped moving on that page and you have been sitting in a room full of people for the last 3 minutes without acknowledging any of them. Which means something arrested your attention. And the only thing on page 7 that should arrest anyone's attention is the tax treaty reference I intentionally flagged as provisional." He set the pen down. "Intentionally. I wanted to see what kind of reader you were before I knew what kind of client you would be." She met his eyes. They were dark, steady, and doing something she couldn't quite name. "You are the kind who reads everything. That makes my job easier." The room was very quiet. Then Ryu Songwon leaned back in his chair, and for the first time, something moved across his face that was not purely professional. "You are not what I expected," he said. "No one ever is," she replied. "Shall we begin?" The Lagos expansion deal was massive. Ryu Capital Group was acquiring a majority stake in 3 separate Nigerian infrastructure companies, a move that would require navigating regulatory approvals from both the Korean Financial Services Commission and Nigeria's Securities and Exchange Commission simultaneously. There were local partnership agreements to structure, cultural due diligence, language gaps in the legal documentation, and a board of Nigerian investors who were equal parts enthusiastic and rightfully suspicious of a Korean billionaire arriving with a checkbook. It was, in short, the kind of deal that could make a career or end one. Nancy threw herself into it with the same ferocity she brought to everything. She was at the office by 7 most mornings. She had calls with Lagos-based regulatory consultants at midnight because of the time difference. She built translation frameworks for legal terminology that did not have direct equivalents across the 2 regulatory systems. She was meticulous, relentless, and increasingly aware that Ryu Songwon was watching her work with something that went beyond the interest of a client monitoring his legal team. He started requesting her specifically for review meetings, not the partner leading the account, not the senior associate above her. The partner, a man named Kang Young-soo who had been at the firm for 20 years and still mispronounced her name, was diplomatically furious about it. "He's the client," he told her, with a smile that did not reach anywhere near his eyes. "We accommodate the client's preferences. But Okafor," and here the smile tightened, "be careful." She knew exactly what he meant, and she ignored every layer of it. The meeting on the 42nd floor happened on a Thursday, 3 weeks into the engagement. Ryu Songwon's main Seoul office occupied the top 3 floors of a building that looked like glass stacked on glass, and the view from the conference room was the kind of thing that made you remember the city was enormous and you were very small inside it. Nancy had arrived early. She was standing at the floor-to-ceiling window, her back to the room, looking at the spread of Seoul below her, the Han River cutting through it like a promise, the mountains gray-green in the distance, when she heard him come in. She did not turn around immediately. She heard him cross the room, felt rather than saw him stop close behind her. "Do you like it from behind?" he asked. She spun so fast she nearly stumbled. He was looking past her at the window at the city. His expression was composed, professionally so, but something at the corner of his mouth was doing something quiet and devastating. "The view," he said, his voice utterly even. "It looks different when you are not standing at the front of the room." She stared at him. Her face felt warm. Her professionalism was doing its absolute best to recover, and it was only partially succeeding. "The view is extraordinary," she said, after a pause that was 2 full seconds longer than she intended. He looked at her then, directly, deliberately. "You thought I meant something else." It was not a question. She lifted her chin. "I think you knew what it would sound like." The silence between them stretched and stretched, and then Ryu Songwon did something she had not seen him do in 3 weeks of meetings. He laughed. It was low and brief and terrifyingly attractive, and Nancy made a decision in that exact moment to add an additional layer of professional distance between herself and this man, effective immediately. She failed at that decision within the hour. Because what happened next was not attraction. It was worse than attraction. It was understanding. They sat across from each other for 2 hours and dismantled the entire Lagos framework together. Not in the adversarial way of client and counsel, but with the rhythm of two people who thought in the same key. He pushed back on her structures not because he doubted her, but because he wanted to see where she would hold. She held everywhere that mattered and conceded gracefully where she had been genuinely wrong. He noticed both. "You are honest about being wrong," he said, near the end of the meeting. "Most people aren't. Being wrong quietly doesn't fix anything," she said. "I would rather be corrected fast and be right later than protect my ego and waste everyone's time." He looked at her. "Where did you learn that?" She considered the question. "The hard way," she said finally. "Like most useful things." Something shifted in his expression. Not professionally, personally. And that was the most dangerous shift of all. What Nancy did not know, what she could not have known from his file or from 3 weeks of meetings or from any public record, was what was happening inside Ryu Capital Group. His board was fracturing. His father, Ryu Jung-han, had recovered from the stroke but had never fully returned to the company. He lived now in a house in Jeju and involved himself occasionally in ways that were more disruptive than helpful. He had 2 loyalists still on the board, men who had been there since before Songwon was born, who believed, quietly and persistently, that the company had been built by Ryu Jung-han and could only be stewarded by his values, his vision, and this was the part that made Songwon's jaw tighten: his choice of successor. His father wanted him to bring in a co-CEO. Not because he doubted Songwon's capability, but because he believed Songwon's life was too isolated, too controlled, too cold, and that the company needed warmth at its center if it was going to expand into emerging markets like Nigeria, where relationships and trust mattered more than spreadsheets. The co-CEO his father had in mind was a man named Baek Do-hyun. Do-hyun was charming in the way of people who have practiced charm until it no longer resembled anything genuine. He was 37, well-connected, and had spent 5 years building his own consultancy before it quietly collapsed under the weight of some decisions he had made that were legally ambiguous at best. He was also Ryu Jung-han's godson. Songwon had said no, clearly, once. The board had tabled the suggestion, but it had not disappeared. And Baek Do-hyun had decided that if the CEO wouldn't open the door, he would find another way in. The Lagos deal was that door. Nancy first became aware that something was wrong when one of the Lagos-based regulatory documents she had filed confidentially appeared, almost verbatim, in a business media report about the deal. The report wasn't damaging, but it was specific in a way that meant someone with access to internal documents had fed information to a journalist. She reported it to Kang Young-soo immediately. He listened, nodded, and told her it was likely a clerical issue and he would look into it. She knew, from the flatness in his voice, that he would not look into it. She went around him. She prepared a security audit request and submitted it directly to Ryu Capital Group's legal liaison, which was technically within her authority as lead associate and completely outside the unspoken hierarchy of the firm. Kang Young-soo called her into his office within the hour. "You do not go directly to the client without routing through me," he said. His voice was very controlled. "The breach involves client confidential material," she said, equally controlled. "My professional obligation runs to the client. Your professional obligation runs through this firm." They stared at each other. "Then the firm should have acted when I raised it," she said. She stood up. "I apologize for the disruption, but I won't apologize for the decision." She left his office knowing that she had just made an enemy she had been carefully avoiding making for 2 years. Ryu Songwon called her personally at 7:30 that evening. She almost did not answer. She almost let it go to voicemail and pretended to have been in the shower. She answered on the 3rd ring. "The security audit," he said without greeting. "You submitted it directly." "Yes." Kang Young-soo is not pleased. "No." A pause. "You knew he wouldn't be." "Yes." Another pause, longer this time. "Why did you do it anyway?" She was standing at her kitchen window. The city was lit up below her apartment, smaller and less overwhelming than it looked from his office 42 floors up. She thought about how to answer and decided on the version that was true. Because whoever leaked that document did it on purpose and will do it again. And the next document they leak might not be harmless. Your Lagos partners are already cautious about this deal. If confidential regulatory strategy reaches the wrong people, it doesn't just embarrass the deal, it could poison their confidence entirely. You could lose Nigerian partners it has taken months to build trust with. Silence. You understand what this deal means to me. It was not quite a question. I understand what it means for the expansion, yes. She paused. And I think I understand why the expansion matters beyond profit. She had not intended to say that. It was too much. But he said quietly, "Say what you think." She took a breath. You are going into emerging markets that major Korean conglomerates have overlooked or mishandled through arrogance. If you do this right, if you structure fair partnerships, if you respect the regulatory culture instead of steamrolling it, you build something that lasts. And I think you know that. I think the money is almost secondary. The silence this time was different, softer around its edges. Meet me tomorrow, he said. Not at the office. Her pulse moved. That is not standard. I know. Meet me anyway. She stood in her kitchen for a long time after they hung up, talking herself out of every feeling that was rising in her chest. One by one, knowing that she was losing the argument with herself. If you are watching this right now and you are already feeling what these two are building toward, and feeling terrified about where it's going, drop a comment below and tell me. Team Nancy or Team Songwon? Who do you think is going to break first? And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Hit that button. This story is just getting started. They met at a small restaurant near Insadong. The kind of place with no sign outside and a menu that changed daily and where the tables were far enough apart that a conversation could stay private. He was already there when she arrived, in a dark coat, without the suit jacket, and the absence of the jacket did something disarming to the entire architecture of his authority. They did not talk about the deal for the first 20 minutes. He asked about Lagos, not in the way of a client verifying local market conditions, in the way of a person genuinely curious about a place they had not yet seen. She told him about the traffic that moved like a living argument, about the markets that were loud and brilliant and absolutely overwhelming to a first-time visitor, about the way the city felt like it was perpetually building itself, loud and unfinished and completely alive. He listened the way very few people listened, not waiting for his turn to speak, but actually inside what she was saying. You miss it, he said. She started to deny it and stopped. Yes, sometimes. It's complicated. Most true feelings are. She looked at him across the table. This was dangerous. This was the kind of conversation that moved things from one category to another and you couldn't move them back. Can I ask you something? She said. Yes. Baek Do-hyun. She watched his face. Something locked down in it quietly. He's connected to your board. Is he connected to the leak? The locking down became very still. What do you know about Baek Do-hyun? I know your board composition. I know the history of everyone on it. It's part of due diligence for a deal this size. She kept her voice even. I also know that his consultancy filed for dissolution around the same time 2 of your board members increased their contact with him. And I know that the specific documents that were leaked were the ones that, if mishandled, could create distrust with your Nigerian partners, which would make the deal look unstable, which would strengthen the argument for bringing in additional executive oversight. Ryu Songwon was very still. You have been investigating beyond your brief, he said. I have been doing my job. Thoroughly. That is the only way I know how. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said something she did not expect. He approached my father 6 months ago. Jung-han, my father, has never forgiven me for restructuring the company without his blessing. Do-hyun told him the Lagos expansion was reckless, that I was moving too fast into markets I didn't understand, that I needed guidance. He said the last word with a precision that carried everything he felt about it compressed into 4 clean syllables. The board proposal came 2 months later. And the leak. I suspected. Now I think I know. He looked at her. You handed me the thread to pull. Then pull it, she said, carefully, and with documentation. You would help with that. I am your legal counsel. she said. It is literally my job. That is not why you are helping, he said quietly. The restaurant was very quiet around them. The space between them across the table felt charged in a way that was making it difficult to breathe normally. Nancy picked up her water glass and made a deliberate decision to say nothing for 7 full seconds, which she counted internally. You should be careful, she said finally, about reading too much into professional diligence. And you, he said just as quietly, should be careful about sitting across from me in a restaurant that has nothing to do with work and telling me this is only professional. She did not have an answer for that, which was itself an answer. What followed was 2 weeks of the most productive and the most quietly excruciating professional collaboration of Nancy's career. They built the case against the leak together, she through legal channels and document trails, he through the discreet parallel investigation his head of corporate security ran simultaneously. They were careful, they were thorough, and they were in the same room together or on the phone together or exchanging annotated documents together for hours every single day. And something was growing between them that neither of them named, because naming it would have required making a choice neither of them was quite ready to make. Nancy knew she was compromised in the technical sense. A lead counsel who had developed feelings for a client was a textbook conflict of interest. She knew it. She kept doing her job with absolute precision and told herself that feelings were not actions and she was in control of her actions. She was, mostly. The night they confirmed the leak traced back to a data extraction carried out by an account registered to one of Do-hyun's former consultancy employees. A ghost account that had been given temporary access to the legal server through Kong and Seoul's client portal was the night everything changed. Because Kong Jung-soo's portal credentials had been used to issue the access. Nancy sat at her desk at 11:30 at night, looking at the access log on her screen, and understood 2 things simultaneously. 1. Kong Jung-soo had either authorized Do-hyun's access to the client server, or he had been careless enough with his credentials for someone to use them without his knowledge. Both possibilities were serious. 1 was criminal. 2. She had just uncovered something that made her position at Kong and Seoul untenable regardless of how it played out. She called Songwon. He answered on the first ring even though it was nearly midnight. What did you find? She told him. The silence on his end was the kind that meant he was processing quickly and thoroughly. You realize this implicates your firm's senior partner. Yes. That puts you in an extremely difficult position. Yes. Her voice was steady. She was proud of how steady it was. Nancy. It was the first time he had used only her first name. She noticed. She could not help but notice. You don't have to be the one who surfaces this. Yes, I do, she said. If I don't, I become part of it by omission. Another silence. I am going to the board tomorrow, he said. All of it. Do-hyun, the leak, the access logs. I want you there. I work for the firm, not directly for you. I am formally requesting that Kong and Seo assign you as exclusive point of contact for all communications related to this matter. I am making that request tonight in writing, and I will be clear that it is non-negotiable. He paused. It protects you. If you are formally appointed by the firm to represent the specific matter, you have grounds to be present in ways that a general associate would not. She was quiet for a moment. That is very calculated. I am a very calculated person, he said. But I am also, a pause. Not doing this only because it is useful. She closed her eyes briefly. The office was empty around her. The city humming outside the window, the access log on her screen telling her everything about how rotten something had become. Get some sleep, she said softly. You too, he said, and then quieter still. You are the most remarkable person I have encountered in a very long time. She sat with that for a long time after he hung up. The board meeting was extraordinary in the way that very controlled demolitions are extraordinary. Songwon presented the evidence methodically, without raising his voice once. Do-hyun was present. He had been invited deliberately so that there was no moment of private warning, no chance to construct a defense in advance. Nancy watched Do-hyun's face as each document appeared on the presentation screen and saw the exact moment he understood it was over. He tried. She had to give him that. He tried to reframe the access as a misunderstanding, a data migration issue, a technical error. He was smooth and quick, and she could see why Ryu Junghan trusted him. And then Nancy stood up. She had not planned to speak. She was there as legal counsel, as observer, as documentation. But when Do-hyun made a specific claim about the timeline of the access log that she knew from her own analysis was factually wrong, not spin, not interpretation, but factually, provably wrong, she stood up. That claim is incorrect, she said clearly. She brought up the counter-documentation on her tablet and presented it in 3 minutes, crisp and cold and airtight. The room was completely silent. Baek Do-hyun looked at her with an expression that she filed away as something to be cautious about later. It was not anger. It was assessment. The kind of look that meant he was deciding something. The 2 board members aligned with Do-hyun resigned from the board that afternoon. Do-hyun himself left without speaking to anyone, which was somehow more alarming than a loud exit. Kang Young-soo was contacted by the firm's managing partner that evening. He claimed he had not knowingly authorized the access. The investigation into whether that was true was ongoing. Nancy was asked to submit a full account of her actions in the matter, which she did in writing, immediately, with every decision justified. She expected to be reprimanded. What she did not expect was the formal commendation from the managing partner, who noted that her professional conduct had protected the firm from deeper liability and maintained client trust in a potentially catastrophic situation. What she also did not expect was Kang Young-soo waiting by the elevator on her way out that evening. "You destroyed me," he said. His voice was very quiet. "You created the conditions," she said. "I just documented them." He looked at her with something complicated in his eyes. Anger and something older and more personal beneath it. "You think you belong here," he said. "In this firm, in this city, in rooms like that boardroom today. You have spent 6 years trying to make yourself belong somewhere you were never intended to be." She looked at him for a long moment. The elevator opened behind her. "I don't need to belong anywhere," she said. "I just need to be excellent. And that I have managed." She stepped into the elevator. "Goodbye, Jung-soo Sasai." The doors closed. She let out a breath that felt like it had been held for 6 years. Hey, if this story is hitting different right now, if you are feeling every single thing Nancy is going through, please like this video. Takes 2 seconds and it helps more than you know. And share this with someone who loves a good story, because we are not done yet, and it only gets more intense from here. The aftermath settled over the following week like weather after a storm. Everything quieter and cleaner, the damage visible, the air changed. Nancy and Songwon did not see each other for 5 days after the board meeting. The immediate legal work transferred to a formal engagement structure. She remained lead associate, her relationship to the account now clearly documented and above board. The space that had been charged and close and complicated was now professionally structured. It should have made things easier. It made things harder, because the structure made it clear how much of what had existed between them was not professional. You do not miss the presence of a client in a professional way. You do not replay a phone call at midnight in a professional way. You do not stand at your kitchen window at 7 in the morning thinking about the way a person laughed, briefly, low, like it escaped them, in a professional way. He called on the 6th day. "The Lagos partners want to meet in person," he said. "I'm flying out in 3 weeks. I want you on the trip." She had expected this. It was logical. She was the one with fluency in both legal frameworks, both cultural contexts. It was absolutely the right professional decision. "I will prepare the travel documentation," she said. "Nancy." A pause. "I also want you on the trip because..." He stopped. She waited. "I am trying to say something that I know I should be careful about saying." Her pulse was doing something unhelpful. "Then perhaps you should say it carefully," she said. "And we can both decide what to do with it after." A breath. "I have not spent 5 days thinking about deal structures." The admission was quiet and precise, and it landed somewhere in the center of her chest. "Neither have I," she said, before she could convince herself to be smarter about it. They did not rush it. That was the thing. The thing that made it different from the way she had feared it might unfold. Reckless and self-destructive. A conflict of interest played out in bad decisions. They were careful with each other in a way that felt like respect more than restraint. She told him directly, that she would not compromise the case, that if anything between them in any way affected her legal judgment, she would recuse herself and recommend a colleague. He said he understood, and she believed him because he then immediately agreed to a clause in the engagement documentation that made her recusal pathway procedurally simple, which was the action of a man who had actually heard what she said, not just waited for her to finish. They had dinner twice before Lagos. Real dinners, not meetings with food on the side. She learned that he cooked badly and knew it and found this funny rather than embarrassing. He learned that she could not watch any movie with an ambiguous ending without needing to discuss it for at least 40 minutes afterward. She told him about her mother in Lagos, who called every Sunday and pretended not to be impressed by anything Nancy had accomplished because she was waiting for the grandchildren announcement. He told her about his father, with difficulty, the way people talk about things they have not fully processed, about growing up in the shadow of a man who was brilliant and distant and had loved the company more demonstrably than he had loved his son. "Is that why you run it the way you do?" she asked. "To prove you can do it differently?" He was quiet for a moment. "I run it the way I do because it's right," he said. "But perhaps," another pause, "it does not hurt that it is also different." She reached across the table and, briefly, covered his hand with hers. It was the first time they had touched deliberately. He turned his hand over and held hers. They stayed like that for a while, and the restaurant moved around them, and neither of them said anything because some things don't need language to be understood. Lagos was everything she had described and more from the inside of his experience. She watched him take the city in, the sensory volume of it, the color, the sheer uncontained energy, and he did not recoil from it, which some people did, which she had half worried he might. He absorbed it. He asked questions that were real questions, not executive due diligence, questions that came from actual curiosity about how the city worked and breathed and survived itself. The meetings with the Nigerian partners were a success. More than a success, because he sat with them not as a conqueror with capital but as a person who had done his homework, who understood the history of foreign investment in Nigeria and why caution was not an insult but a lived inheritance, who acknowledged openly that Ryu capital came to build with, not extract from, and who then backed that language with structural terms in the partnership agreement that were more equitable than anything the partners had negotiated with any international firm before. Nancy had helped design those terms. She sat in those meetings and watched them land, watched the partners' body language shift from guarded to engaged, and felt something enormous and warm move through her chest. On the last evening in Lagos, she took him to the waterfront. The city was lit up across the water, sprawling and improbable and magnificent. "This is what I miss," she said quietly. He stood beside her. "Close. Why did you leave?" "Opportunity," she said. And then, "And fear. I think I was afraid that if I stayed in a place that already loved me, I would never know if I could make somewhere unfamiliar love me too." She paused. "That sounds narcissistic." "It sounds human," he said. He was looking at her. "Did it work?" She thought about 6 years. The mornings of doubt and the victories she had not celebrated loudly enough. The people who had underestimated her and the work that had outlasted every one of them. The man standing beside her right now. "I think it's working," she said. He turned fully toward her. The city was very loud and very beautiful around them. "I am going to say something," he said. "And I need you to know I have thought about it carefully. I am not impulsive." "I know," she said. Her voice had gone softer than she intended. "I would like the chance to do this properly," he said. "Whatever this is, whatever it becomes. I would like to not pretend it is something smaller than it is." She looked at him. "What does properly mean to you?" "It means not hiding it, not being careful about it in ways that diminish it. It means being honest about the fact that you matter to me in a way that has nothing to do with the deal or the firm or any professional context." The water behind them was moving, soft and persistent. "There are complications," she said. "Yes. My career. Your position. Your father, probably. The industry's perception." "Yes," he said again simply. "And still." She looked at him for a long moment. She was a woman who had built her life on clear-eyed assessment of risk. She was also a woman who had spent 6 years making herself excellent in rooms that had not expected her. and she had done it because she believed that what was worth having was worth the difficulty of having it. And still, she repeated. And when he leaned forward and kissed her, standing at the edge of the city that had made her and the water that held the sky, she understood with perfect clarity that she had never been less afraid of falling. But Baek Do-hyun had not finished. She should have known. She did know somewhere. She had filed the assessment that he had not gone quietly, that his look in the boardroom had been a man deciding, not a man defeated. But the Lagos trip had been all-consuming, and in the warmth of what was growing between herself and Songwon, she had let the vigilance slip by a degree. The article appeared 2 weeks after they returned to Seoul. It was published in a business gossip column, the kind of outlet that operated in the intersection of finance and personal scandal, where the damage was done not through evidence but through implication. The article did not name her directly. It referred to a senior foreign legal associate and a major Korean conglomerate CEO, and suggested that the Lagos deal's unusually favorable partnership terms had been influenced by a personal relationship between the legal lead and the client. It was calculated precisely to destroy without proof, questioned her integrity, questioned his judgment, and it was written in the language of financial journalism enough to sound credible to people who wanted to believe it. She read it at 7 in the morning, standing in her kitchen, and then she sat down on the floor. Not because she was broken. She was not broken, but because she was exhausted in a way that went past the body, the exhaustion of having worked so hard, for so long, to be seen as exactly what she was, and understanding that one targeted article in a gossip column could undo 6 years of impeccable work in the minds of people who were looking for a reason to doubt her. Songwon called her within the hour. "I have seen it," she said before he could speak. "Nancy, I need to think," she said. "I need to think before I react, because how I react to this matters as much as anything else." A pause. "Tell me what you need." "Nothing right now." And then, "Actually, just stay on the phone for a minute." He stayed on the phone. He did not fill the silence with reassurance or strategy or anything. He just stayed, and that was exactly what she needed. She responded the way she responded to every challenge in her career, with documentation and precision. She issued a formal statement through the firm, now under a managing partner who had seen her work and was motivated to protect the assets she represented. The statement laid out the formal recusal protocols that had been established before any personal relationship existed, the timeline of engagement terms negotiated, and the third-party verification from the Nigerian partners themselves, who, significantly, provided their own statement affirming that the partnership terms had been negotiated rigorously and at arm's length. Songwon held a press conference. Brief, controlled. He confirmed the personal relationship, stated the timeline, stated that all professional safeguards had been properly observed, and then said, with a precision that was distinctly him, "I will not discuss my private life further, but I will say that the professional conduct of the legal team on this engagement has been exemplary, and anyone who suggests otherwise is either misinformed or intentionally misleading." The implication, that they knew who had planted the story, was clear to everyone who was paying attention. Baek Do-hyun resigned from his informal advisory role with the board 2 days later. A formal complaint was filed with the Korean Bar and Business Ethics Commission regarding the data breach. It would take time, but it was filed, and it was documented, and Nancy had made sure every single piece of documentation was airtight. 6 months later, the Lagos deal closed. The signing ceremony was held at the Nigerian partners' headquarters in Lagos. A deliberate choice that Songwon had insisted on, because closing the deal on Nigerian ground meant something. It meant the partnership was one of equals, and the symbolism was not lost on anyone in the room. Nancy's mother was in the building because of course she was. She had somehow heard about the ceremony and decided that proximity to her daughter's professional triumph was non-negotiable. She met Songwon in the lobby before the signing and looked at him with the specific look that Nigerian mothers have perfected across generations. The look that measures you completely in 12 seconds and renders a verdict that is communicated entirely through eyebrows. "You are the Korean one," her mother said. "I am," Songwon said. "You treat my daughter well?" "I am trying to," he said. "She is not easy." Her mother looked at him. "No, she never was." A pause. "Good. Neither am I." "Welcome." Nancy, standing 2 feet away, covered her face with her portfolio. That evening, after the ceremony, after the partners' dinner, after her mother had gone back to her sister's house, Nancy stood on the balcony of the hotel and looked at Lagos spread out below her, and felt the particular quality of silence that comes after something enormous is finished and before the next thing has begun. Songwon came out and stood beside her. "What are you thinking?" he asked. She thought about it genuinely, the way she always did when he asked her a real question. "I am thinking about the version of myself that arrived in Seoul 6 years ago," she said. With 2 suitcases and a scholarship and a certainty that she could make something of herself if she was good enough and stubborn enough and brave enough. She paused. "I think that version of me would be very surprised by this moment." "Good surprised or complicated surprised?" "Both," she said. "Mostly good." She looked at him. "What about you?" He was quiet for a moment. "I spent 8 years building something I thought would speak for itself," he said. "Prove something. Make the silence between me and my father into something that made sense." He looked at the city. "It turns out the thing I needed to prove it to was myself." She leaned her head against his shoulder. He put his arm around her. "Your father called last week," she said. He stiffened slightly. "I know. Are you going to call him back?" Pause. "Eventually." "Songwon." "Yes," he said. "Yes, I will call him back." She turned to look at him, this man who ran a company like a scalpel and made her laugh and stayed on the phone in silence when she needed silence and had walked into a Lego signing ceremony on principle and held her hand across a restaurant table like it was the most natural thing in the world. "You are not as cold as you think you are," she said. "You are not as invulnerable as you think you are," he replied. She smiled. "We are both disasters. Highly functional disasters. The best kind." He laughed, that low, brief, escaped laugh she had catalogued in her chest from the very first time she heard it, and kissed the top of her head, and Lagos kept being enormous and lit and alive below them, and the next chapter had not yet announced itself, but it was there, close and certain, and she was not afraid of it. She was ready for whatever came next. She had been ready for a while, and that, right there, is exactly why you never walk away from your own story, even when it gets hard and complicated and someone tries to write a version of it that doesn't belong to you. Nancy built something that no headline could take from her, because she built it from the inside out. If this story moved you, if you felt every single moment of this, please hit the like button right now. It genuinely means the world, and it helps this channel reach more people who love stories like this one. And listen, if you are new here, you have just found your home. Subscribe to AfroKorean Stories because this is what we do here. Real emotions, complex characters, love that costs something and means everything. Drop a comment below. I want to know, what was the moment in this story that got you the most? Was it the board meeting? The Lagos waterfront? The phone call in the dark? Tell me everything, and share this with your people because good stories deserve to travel far. Thank you for staying until the end. I will see you in the next one. Do not go anywhere.